She was just a child holding a worn lunch bag. But when the CEO looked up from the boardroom table and saw what was written on it, everything she thought she knew about success shattered in an instant. Margaret Chen hadn't cried in a boardroom in 15 years. She'd built her reputation on steel nerves and sharper instincts, transforming a failing tech startup into a billion-dollar empire. She'd fired executives without flinching, stared down hostile takeovers, and negotiated deals that made grown men sweat. But on this ordinary Tuesday morning, a 7-year-old girl with untied shoelaces and a father's forgotten lunch would bring the most powerful woman in Silicon Valley to tears. It started like any other executive meeting. 23 floors above San Francisco's financial district, Margaret sat at the head of a glass table worth more than most people's cars, surrounded by vice presidents discussing quarterly projections. The numbers were good, exceptional actually. Another record-breaking quarter. Another reason for shareholders to celebrate while Margaret felt that familiar hollowness that success couldn't quite fill. Then the door opened. Every head turned. The room fell silent. Standing in the doorway, dwarfed by the massive double doors, was a little girl in a faded yellow dress. Her dark hair was pulled into lopsided pigtails, and she clutched a crumpled brown paper bag against her chest like it held the world's most precious treasure. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm looking for my dad." Margaret's assistant, James, appeared behind the child, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Miss Chen. She slipped past security. I'll take her." "Wait." Margaret raised her hand, her eyes fixed on the little girl. There was something about her, the determination in those wide brown eyes, the way she stood despite obviously being terrified. "Who's your father, sweetheart?" "Mr. Rodriguez," the girl said, her chin lifting slightly. "He cleans the floors here. He forgot his lunch. And Mama's working double shifts at the hospital, so I brought it. He needs to eat. He gets dizzy if he doesn't eat." Carlos Rodriguez. Margaret knew the name, though she'd never actually spoken to the man. He was part of the night cleaning crew, one of dozens of invisible workers, who kept the building running after everyone else went home. She saw him sometimes when she worked late, a quiet man who always stepped aside in hallways, who made himself small in a building full of people who made themselves large. "He's on the 19th floor, Margaret heard herself saying. "James, could you take, what's your name?" "Elena." The girl's grip on the lunch bag tightened. "Elena Rodriguez. Could you take Elena to find her father?" Margaret watched James nod and reach for Elena's hand. But something made her add, "Actually, wait. Elena, may I see that?" The girl hesitated, then walked forward with careful steps, holding out the brown paper bag. It was the kind you could buy 50 for $1 at the grocery store, wrinkled from use and reuse. But it was what was written on it that made Margaret's breath catch. In careful, childish handwriting, words covered every inch of available space. "Daddy, you are the strongest. You are the best. You work hard for me and Mama. I love you. You make the building shine like you make our home shine. You are my hero." Below that, in different colored crayons, were drawings, a stick figure man with a mop, a little girl holding his hand, hearts and stars scattered across the paper like confetti. At the bottom, in what must have been the mother's handwriting, "We are so proud of you. You matter. What you do matters." Margaret's throat tightened. Her fingers traced the words, each one written with such care, such love. She thought of her own father, gone now for 10 years. She thought of the last conversation they'd had before he died, when he'd asked her if she was happy, and she talked about stock prices instead of answering. "This is beautiful, Elena," Margaret said softly. "Your father is very lucky." "He's the best dad," Elena said with absolute certainty. "He's always tired, but he still reads me stories. And he always says he's doing important work even if nobody sees it. He says making things clean and safe for people is important. He's right." Margaret looked up at the executives around the table, men and women in suits that cost more than Carlos Rodriguez probably made in a month. They were watching her curiously, waiting. "He's absolutely right." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I think we should all go meet Elena's father." "Margaret?" Her CFO, Richard, looked confused. "We're in the middle of—" "The meeting can wait." Her voice had that tone that meant the discussion was over. 5 minutes, come on." They must have looked absurd. Margaret thought, parade of executives in designer clothes, following a little girl in a worn dress through the sterile corridors of Chen Industries. But Elena led them with confidence, navigating the building like she'd memorized every turn during previous visits to bring her father forgotten lunches. They found Carlos Rodriguez on his knees in a 19th floor hallway, scrubbing a stubborn stain from the carpet. He looked up, confused, then alarmed as he saw the crowd approaching. But when he saw Elena, his expression transformed into pure joy mixed with concern. "Mia, what are you doing here?" He stood quickly, wiping his hands on his work pants. "Is everything okay? Is Mama—" "Mama's fine, Daddy." Elena ran to him, and he scooped her up despite his obvious embarrassment at being seen this way. "You forgot your lunch again. Elena, you can't just—" He finally seemed to fully register who was standing in front of him, and his face went pale. "Miss Chen, I'm so sorry. She shouldn't have bothered you. I don't know how she got past—" "Mr. Rodriguez." Margaret stepped forward, and the entire hallway seemed to hold its breath. "How long have you worked here?" He swallowed hard. 7 years, ma'am." 7 years. She nodded slowly. "And in those 7 years, how many times have you seen me?" I see you sometimes. Late at night. You work very hard." "We both do." Margaret took the lunch bag from Elena and held it up so Carlos could see the words, the drawings, the love made visible in crayon and careful letters. "But I've never stopped to thank you for yours. I've never stopped to tell you that what you do matters. That you matter." Carlos's eyes glistened. Elena pressed her face into his shoulder. Margaret turned to face her executives. "This is Carlos Rodriguez. For 7 years, he's made sure our building is clean, safe, and welcoming. While we're home sleeping, he's here making our workspace shine. While we're taking clients to expensive lunches, he's carefully removing every speck of dirt from our floors. And his daughter thinks he's a hero." Her voice grew stronger. "She's right." She looked back at Carlos. "I built this company on the idea that we're innovative, that we're leaders. But I forgot the most important innovation of all, recognizing the humanity in everyone who makes our success possible. You're not invisible, Mr. Rodriguez, not anymore." That afternoon, Margaret canceled the rest of her meetings. She spent 3 hours with HR, reviewing wages, benefits, and working conditions for every janitor, security guard, cafeteria worker, and maintenance person in the building. She discovered that Carlos worked 2 jobs to support his family, that his wife was a nursing assistant working doubles to help pay for Elena's asthma medication, that they'd been on a waiting list for better housing for 2 years. Within a week, every service worker at Chen Industries received a significant raise. Within a month, Margaret had established a scholarship fund for their children and a comprehensive health care plan. Within 3 months, the Rodriguez family had moved into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, and Carlos was working only 1 job, at Chen Industries, where he'd been promoted to facilities manager. But the real change wasn't in the policies or the paychecks. It was in the culture. Margaret started learning names, stopping to talk to people she'd walked past for years. She shared Elena's lunch bag story at the next shareholders meeting, framed by a photo of the girl and her father that now hung in her office. "This bag reminds me why we're really here," she told the investors. "Not just to make money, but to create a place where every person's dignity is honored, where everyone from the CEO to the man who mops our floors knows they matter." Some shareholders grumbled about the costs. A few called her soft, but productivity soared. Turnover dropped to almost nothing. And when a major publication did a feature on Chen Industries' revolutionary workplace culture, job applications flooded in from people who wanted to work somewhere that valued humanity over hierarchy. A year later, on a Tuesday that felt remarkably like the one that had changed everything, Margaret sat in her office working late when she heard a soft knock. She looked up to find Carlos and Elena at her door. "We won't keep you," Carlos said. "But Elena wanted to give you something." The little girl, now 8 and wearing new clothes that actually fit, walked forward and held out a drawing. It showed 3 stick figures, a tall woman, a man with a mop, and a small girl. They were all holding hands. Above them, in Elena's improving but still childish handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for seeing my daddy." Margaret took the drawing with shaking hands. "Thank you for bringing his lunch that day." I bring it every Tuesday now, Elena said proudly. But now Daddy comes home for dinner every night, so I just bring dessert. Mama makes the best cookies. After they left, Margaret hung the drawing next to the lunch bag, both carefully preserved behind glass. They were worth more to her than any award, any headline, any stock price. She thought about how close she'd come to missing it all. The chance to see Carlos, to know Elena, to remember that success without humanity is just an expensive kind of emptiness, all because a 7-year-old girl had loved her father enough to walk through her fears into a room full of strangers. Margaret picked up her phone and called her own daughter, whom she hadn't spoken to in 3 weeks. "Hi, honey," she said when the call connected. "I was just thinking, I love you, and I'm proud of you, and I wanted you to know that." There was a pause. Then her daughter's voice, surprised and soft. "Thanks, Mom. I love you too." It wasn't much, but it was a start. And it all began with a little girl, a forgotten lunch, and the simple revolutionary act of seeing someone who'd been invisible for far too long